It's 1 in the morning, and the light from your phone is the only thing on in the room. You've been scrolling for 40 minutes. You couldn't tell me a single thing you watched. Here's the strange part. In your hand, right now, you're holding more human knowledge than any king, any scholar, any genius in history ever had access to. Every scientific paper ever published, every philosophy, every language, all of it a thumb swipe away. And somehow, you feel less certain about the world than you did 5 years ago. Less sure of what's true, less sure of your own opinions the moment someone pushes back on them. That's not a coincidence, and it's not a coma you talked yourself into. It's the result of something real, something measurable that's been happening to your brain and to basically every brain around you for the last several years. So let's be clear about what this video is not. This is not a story about you being lazy. This is not a story about weak willpower. And this is not another lecture about how phones are bad for you. You've heard that one, and it didn't change anything, did it? This is a story about a machine. Actually, 3 of them, stacked on top of each other, all quietly deciding what you believe before you've had a real chance to think about it. And here's something to hold on to for later. There's a 4th piece to this puzzle that didn't even exist when the first 3 were already well understood. It showed up in a research lab in Philadelphia this past January. It gives an old, famous idea about how your brain works a new twist nobody had written down before. And once you hear it, you won't be able to unsee it in your own behavior. We'll get there. But first, we need to understand why a species that built rockets, cured diseases, and mapped its own genome is currently losing an argument with a smartphone. Let's start small. Let's start with Sarah. Sarah is 32, works in marketing, and last week she needed to decide which laptop to buy. Reasonable task. She opened 5 tabs, comparison sites, forums, a few reviews. 10 minutes later, she closed all 5. And if you'd asked her right then what she'd learned, she couldn't have told you. Not one spec, not one recommendation, just a vague, tired feeling of having done research. That's not a personal failing. That's your brain running into a wall that an economist named Herbert Simon described back in 1971, decades before the internet existed in any form you'd recognize. His insight was almost embarrassingly simple. Information isn't free. It costs something, and what it costs is attention. So in a world that floods you with more information than any human has ever faced, you don't get richer in knowledge. You get poorer in attention. Every tab open is attention leaking out of a bucket with more holes than the last time you checked. Now let's go one level deeper. Let's talk about Marcus. Marcus is 45, manages a small team, and has a habit he's never noticed in himself. He opens an article, scrolls straight to the comments, reads the first confident-sounding reply, and agrees with it, before he's even finished the actual article. Every time. This is where it gets interesting, because there's a Nobel Prize-winning explanation for exactly what's happening inside Marcus's skull. Daniel Kahneman spent a career mapping out 2 systems your brain uses to think. System 1 is fast, automatic, emotional. It doesn't analyze, it just reacts. System 2 is slow, deliberate, effortful. It's the one that actually weighs evidence, and it burns real energy doing it. Under normal conditions, these 2 systems cooperate. But your phone doesn't give you normal conditions. It gives you an endless stream of things demanding instant judgment, and System 2, tired, outnumbered, running on fumes, simply stops showing up for the fight. What's left in charge is the part of your brain built for spotting danger on a savanna, not for evaluating nuanced arguments from strangers on the internet. Neuroscientists call this an amygdala hijack, your brain's ancient alarm system overriding its newer reasoning system. And a comment that confidently agrees with you feels, to that ancient alarm system, exactly like safety. Here's the part that should genuinely worry you. This isn't a switch that's permanently stuck. Cognitive neuroscientist Maryanne has spent years studying what she calls deep reading, the kind of sustained, effortful attention that lets you actually follow an argument instead of just skimming its shape. Her research is clear on one point. That ability isn't something you're born with. It's a circuit your brain builds through practice, the same way it builds any other skill. And here's why that should worry you rather than comfort you. Anything your brain builds through practice, It can also lose through neglect. The muscle that lets you sit with a hard idea for 20 straight minutes doesn't disappear because you're a worse person than you used to be. It disappears because you stopped using it, and something else, faster, easier, more rewarding in the short term, took its place. So here's where we actually are. Your attention is scarce by design of the universe, not by accident. Your fast-thinking system is built to take shortcuts under pressure. And your capacity for deep, sustained thought is a trained skill that atrophies the moment you stop training it. None of that, on its own, would be a crisis. People have always had limited attention, always had cognitive shortcuts, always had to work to stay sharp. What turned this from a mild inconvenience into something closer to a collective emergency is what happened next. Because something started exploiting all three of these weaknesses on purpose, at scale, for profit. Quick recap before we go further. Your brain isn't broken. It's outmatched. And in the second half of this video, we're going to name the exact system that's doing the outmatching, including the part that showed up this year and changes how we have to think about all of it. If any of this is landing, hit subscribe now, because the next few minutes are where the actual design machine gets exposed. Now, at this point, it would be completely fair for you to think, okay, but isn't this still just laziness? Discipline? People have always had the option to put the phone down and read a book instead. That's not an unreasonable thing to think. From the outside, skimming instead of reading, agreeing instead of analyzing, letting an app pick your opinions for you. That really does look like a personal choice made badly, over and over. Except it isn't only a personal choice. It's the output of a system engineered with real money and real incentives to produce exactly that behavior. Here's the business model in one sentence. The platforms in your pocket make money by keeping your eyes on the screen, and they sell that attention to advertisers. That's it. That's the whole game. And it turns out there's a very reliable way to keep eyes on a screen. Feed them content that provokes a strong emotional reaction, because strong emotional reactions get shared, and shared content brings in more eyes. Researchers studying online sharing patterns have found something consistent. Language loaded with moral or emotional charge spreads noticeably faster than neutral language. Outrage isn't a side effect of social media. It's closer to the fuel. Once you see that, a few other things stop being mysterious. Why does your feed seem to know exactly which opinions will make your blood pressure spike? Because a system optimizing for engagement will, without any malicious intent required, converge on outrage, because outrage works. Why do you rarely see a well-argued opposing viewpoint anymore? Because the algorithm's job isn't to inform you. It's to keep you watching, and showing you things that already match your existing beliefs is a far more reliable way to do that than showing you something that makes you stop and think. That's how you end up sealed inside what researchers call an echo chamber. Not because you chose to close yourself off, but because the path of least resistance was built to close it for you. And there's a social layer stacked on top of the algorithmic one. Think about Elena, a school teacher who, one evening, questioned a popular opinion in a group chat. Nothing extreme, just a genuine, well-meant pushback. Within a week, she noticed she'd been quietly dropped from the group's plans. Nobody said why. Nobody had to. That's not paranoia. That's a very old survival instinct doing exactly what it evolved to do. For most of human history, being wrong but accepted by the group was a survival strategy, and being right but cast out was often a death sentence. Your brain still runs that calculation, even now, even when the tribe is just a group chat and the exile is just some awkward silence. When the choice comes down to correct but isolated versus wrong but included, a huge number of brains quietly, without ever consciously deciding to pick included. Multiply Elena's story by a few 100 million people, each doing the same quiet math, and you get a culture where a lot of people have simply learned it's safer to keep their real thoughts to themselves. So now we've got three forces stacked on each other. A brain with a scarcity of attention and a hair-trigger fast-thinking system. A business model that profits from provoking that system as often as possible, and a social instinct that punishes anyone who steps outside the resulting consensus. Individually, rough. Together, they start to look less like bad luck and more like a machine. But there's still one more piece. And it's the one that changes everything because it doesn't just exploit your thinking anymore. It starts doing your thinking for you. David is 29, in grad school, and about 2 years ago, he started using AI to draft his emails. Just the annoying ones at first. The scheduling back and forth, the mildly awkward asks. It saved him time, and it seemed harmless. He was still the one making the decisions, just skipping the typing. Except a few months ago, David sat down to write something that actually mattered to him. On his own, no AI involved. And he froze. Not because he didn't know what he wanted to say, because he'd quietly lost the habit of finding the words himself. The muscle wasn't gone forever, but it had gone soft in a way that genuinely scared him. Remember what I asked you to hold on to at the start of this video? The thing that showed up in a research lab in Philadelphia this past January? Here it is. Researchers at Wharton looked closely at exactly what David went through, and they gave it a name: cognitive surrender. It's what happens when you start accepting an AI's output with barely any real scrutiny. Not because you're stupid, but because scrutiny is expensive, and the AI's answer is right there, confident and fast. Here's the number that should stop you cold. In their study, people accepted the AI's wrong answers 8 times out of 10. Not sometimes, 80% of the time. And the people making those mistakes didn't feel less sure of themselves. They felt more confident than people who'd worked the problem out on their own, with nothing but their own head to rely on. Wrong and certain. That's the combination cognitive surrender produces. What makes this genuinely new is that it doesn't fit neatly into Kahneman's 2 systems anymore. It's not your fast, instinctive system 1. It's not your slow, effortful system 2. It's something outside your own head entirely, a 3rd system sitting between you and the world, quietly making calls that used to be yours to make. And here's the trap hiding inside that convenience. AI-generated text almost always sounds reasonable. Confident, structured, grammatically clean. It has all the surface texture of good thinking, whether or not any actual thinking happened underneath it. That surface polish is exactly why it's so easy to stop checking. Why would you double-check something that sounds as put together? This connects to something bigger happening across the entire internet, and the real numbers are, if anything, more unsettling than the popular myth about it. You may have heard the phrase dead internet theory, the idea that much of what you scroll past was never written by a human being at all. For a while, people treated that as an exaggeration, maybe even a joke. It isn't anymore. Recent analysis has found that automated traffic has now crossed a line nobody expected this soon. Bots account for more than half of all activity on the web, outnumbering actual humans. And when you look specifically at freshly published pages, nearly 3 out of every 4 contain content that was written, at least in part, by AI rather than a person. That's not a distant, sci-fi prediction about some future year. That's the internet you were scrolling through at 1 in the morning, right now this year. So put the whole picture together. A brain with limited attention and a trigger-happy shortcut system. A business model built to provoke that shortcut system on repeat. A tribal instinct that punishes anyone who breaks from the group's consensus. And now, a 4th system, outside your own skull, quietly doing your thinking for you while sounding exactly as confident as if you'd done it yourself. None of these 4 forces had to conspire with each other. They didn't need a secret meeting. They just each did what they were built to do, and they all happened to point at the exact same weak spot in the exact same species at the exact same moment in history. That's not a coincidence you can blame on any one villain. It's closer to bad timing. A species built for scarcity meeting a world built for excess, right when the tools that could rescue us from it turn out to also be the tools most capable of doing the deciding for us. So where does that leave you? Not powerless, just correctly informed about what you're actually up against. Here's what I want you to walk away with. First, the factual takeaway. This was never one problem. It's 4 separate systems, your own biology, an economic incentive structure, a tribal social instinct, and now an artificial one, all pointed at the same weak spot at the same time. Treating it as a single problem is why most advice about it doesn't work. Second, the personal takeaway. Every single one of those 4 systems operates in the same tiny gap, the space between something triggering you and you reacting to it. That gap is small. Sometimes it's less than a second. But it is the only place any of this can actually be interrupted. Not by willpower, by noticing. Third, and this is the one that actually matters day to day, there's a 3-step way to widen that gap, and none of it is glamorous, which is exactly why almost nobody talks about it. Step 1. Before you absorb anything, check the source, not the content. Don't ask, does this sound true? Ask, who is this? And do they have a track record I can verify? Researchers call this lateral reading, and it's a 5-second habit that catches more nonsense than any amount of careful reading of the nonsense itself ever could. Step 2. Practice watching your own thinking happen, almost like a third person looking over your shoulder. When you feel a strong reaction to something, pause and ask what specifically triggered it. That's the beginning of metacognition, and it's the difference between having a thought and being had by one. Step 3, the hardest one. Hold your opinions a little more loosely than your identity. You are not the sum of your current opinions. You can update one of them, even a big one, the moment better evidence shows up, and it costs you nothing real. The people who can do this aren't weaker thinkers. They're the only ones actually still thinking. Here's my honest question for you, and I'd genuinely like to know, out of those 4 forces, your own biology, the algorithm, the AI, or the need to belong, which one do you think has the strongest grip on you personally? Not on people in general, on you. Drop it in the comments, because I read every single one, and I'm curious. Because here's the thing about that 1 in the morning, phone light on your face, 40 minutes gone, and nothing retained. That's not who you are. That's just what happens to a perfectly good brain when 4 different systems are quietly pulling at it from 4 different directions at once. Now you know their names. And knowing their names is the first move nobody can take away from you.